Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. One of the necessary but unfortunate ways about how we do church in my tradition is that we use pericopes. Now, I suspect that many of you have never heard that word before, but that's actually the name we use for the scriptures that will be read in worship on Sunday. The word pericope means a section that has been cut out of a larger work. So, for example, instead of reading the whole Gospel of Mark on a given Sunday, we will read a few selected verses, one story perhaps. Those verses we read are lifted from the larger work, and we call that a pericope. Each Sunday has appointed pericopes that are intended to give us the important themes of the Bible and of our faith. They have the advantage of forcing pastors to deal with passages that might not be their favorites, but which are important to the Bible. What can be unfortunate is that sometimes by just focusing on the pericope, the cutout section, we miss the sweep of the larger story. In all my years of preaching, that seems particularly true for the story of Elijah. Oh, he comes up often in our Sunday scriptures, but his story seems somewhat disjointed, and we see it in pieces and not within the whole story. So the goal for this week and next week is to try to put it all together. As Paul Harvey would say, to give you the rest of the story. It's quite a story, and I hope you enjoy the journey as we see God at work through Elijah. Let me give you a little background. In those days, kings would make treaties and alliances with other nations, and those treaties were held together through marriages. One king's son would marry the other king's daughter, and that preserved the alliance. And so it was that Ahab, a prince of Israel, married Jezebel from an area we call Lebanon today. The problem was that recent kings in Israel had begun to wander from the faith in God, encouraging the building of worship centers apart from the temple in Jerusalem, which was a no-no, and also giving some worship and attention to the fertility god Baal, a definite no-no. Jezebel made things even worse, bringing in a large entourage of priests and prophets of Baal. Well, the marriage of Ahab and Jezebel brought security and economic prosperity to Israel for a time, but it did not bring peace with the Israelite prophets who called for faithfulness to God alone. And it's into that situation that suddenly Elijah appears and flatly tells Ahab what will happen because of how he is leading the people away from God. Elijah says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." Now let's just pause right there and note what has happened. Elijah is a nobody. The town he's from no longer exists, and the Bible doesn't even tell us who his father is. Nevertheless, he has the temerity to stand up to the king without fear and to tell him a devastating message. One of the criticisms I have heard about the church is that we don't speak to power very well. We don't challenge power or call those in power to repent very often. Elijah did not share that problem. Without fear, he stood with God and called Ahab into account. The next thing that happened was that God told Elijah to go out into the wilderness and to camp beside a wadi. We might consider the wilderness in Israel something like a desert. There are not many plants and scarce water. A wadi is a stream fed by rain upstream, or sometimes a spring, but which can dry up. Also, in the wilderness, it's pretty difficult to find food. But God tells Elijah to hide from Ahab's wrath and vengeance there. He drinks from the wadi, and ravens bring him bread and meat every morning and every evening. That's another interesting place to pause. Elijah depended on God for everything, and God provided. That's a deep trust that might serve as a model and a call to us and to our own trust in God. So that's where we're going to leave Elijah today. But his story will continue tomorrow. He was a man who wasn't afraid to speak for God no matter what, and a man who placed himself in God's hands unreservedly. How can we be more like him? Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.